The ZTE Nubia REDMAGIC 6S Pro is an interesting phone because, as the name suggests, it's an upgrade of a previous model, and Pro. But what makes this phone so special? Let's find out. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and today I'm going to be reviewing the REDMAGIC 6S Pro, which is a gaming-centered device that also happens to be a phone. I'm not the best at this because I don't really game on my phone, but I also feel like this will allow me to really bring up the real upsides and downsides to this phone, as well as gaming phones in general. I've reviewed a few gaming-centered phones like the Razer phone and the Razer phone 2, so gaming phones aren't new to me, but I've never really used one that looks like this. But hey, why not? Let's get gaming out of the way. Now, it would make sense that this phone is filled with gaming settings and options, whether we're talking about hardware or software. But the first thing you notice when being handed this phone is the large screen that refreshes really fast. This is a 6.8-inch 1080p 20:9 ratio AMOLED display with a max refresh rate of 165 Hz. The touch sampling rate maxes out at 720 Hz and normally sits at 360 Hz. You also get a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio and 700 nits of peak brightness. By no way is the screen bad at all. I'm just always confused when gaming phones reject the 1440p or 4K displays, even though the price point would be raised because of that. Except for on ROG phones, that doesn't make sense. You get a $1,500 phone, whatever. The weird thing is that this phone rarely ever pushes to 165 Hz in general. You generally have to lock the refresh rate to even get to that option, and even when that does happen, it really only pushes out about 60 to 120 frames per second. Regardless, it looks amazing, as you would expect. I'm just confused why they would add that extra 45 Hz, even though it doesn't really go anywhere besides the UI. And technically, it might not even go there. As for gaming, there is a physical toggle which throws you into REDMAGIC's 90 frames per second launcher and gives you a lot of features. Turbofan toggle on the bottom left, superpower ... Yeah, I know, but this shows you your screenshots and your screen recordings as well as different plugins, what they do and what games they work on. On the top left, you get the usual time and battery, with the bottom right allowing you to toggle how the games are displayed. The top right has a D-pad for external devices, which will help you pair REDMAGIC accessories that you have. Then the account area shows some interesting account details explaining how much you play games, which ones, and what your rank is. I kind of feel like an adult explaining 401ks right now. I'm sorry about this. This also keeps all the other settings and shows off some interesting English phrases that are spread across the UI, like anti-mistouch, which is probably supposed to be prevent accidental touches. While in the game, you get some quick settings, which are on the top left or top right, and they bring in a whole bunch of different things like boosting performance on the fly, network speed, brightness, screen recording, FPS counter, charge separation to force power out of the charger rather than out of the battery, screen hang-up, which is really kind of like locking the screen, and to get out of it, you actually have to slide to unlock the hook. Don't worry, there's more. Like the brightness toggle that always tries to remind you that the highest brightness will consume more power. Then there's a toggle for the fan, and so on. On the left side, you can go back to the home game launcher. Then there's a settings panel that allows you to change sampling rate, sensitivity, accidental touch protection, which is probably what the anti-mistouch was trying to say, performance modes again, a toggle area for different screen display modes, function allocation, which is a really weird way to say how manual screen recording happens, then a toggle area for plugins. Going back, we get the plugin toggles in this area as well, and the last spot is where the shoulder toggles are, which allows for 3 levels of sensitivity on the right and left, different modes for those as well as allowing for a swiping section on the back of the phone. The latter is kind of strange to get used to, but you can toggle all of them on or off separately depending on what you're trying to do, which is pretty cool. All of these have a 450 Hz touch sampling rate, if that matters. Either way, everything is super fast, just like the gaming phone itself, thanks to that massive amount of specs slammed into this phone. This is easily the fastest gaming phone that you can buy in 2021, or at least at the moment, and that's all because of the Snapdragon 888 Plus chip in this phone, paired with 12 or 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM, and 128 to 256 gigabytes of UFS 3.1 storage. However, it should be noted 18GB RAM, 512GB storage is possible. I just couldn't really find it anywhere. To power this phone, we are given a 5050 mAh battery, which is about 19.5 watt hours, and lasts throughout the day easily. Gameplay time is decent, and I never really had a chance to test to see how long it'll actually last, but I've been told that 2 to 3 hours of heavy gaming is easy to achieve. Again, charging is super fast on this phone, even though it kind of seems like it maxes out at 30 watts, when 66 to 120 watts is advertised depending on which model you buy. Nubia literally says that this phone will go from 0 to 100% in 65 minutes while charging at 30 watts. So that's kind of interesting, as opposed to making a 66 or 120 watt claim. Realistically, you could think of this kind of like a Nintendo Switch, but ironically it has a better battery, processor, and charging speed. As for cooling, there are numerous pieces on this phone, but let's talk about the two things. The phone heats up through the top, so gaming will kind of feel weird around that area over time, but it is smart for the air to pass through on the left side and be exhausted on the right side, which is generally the top of the phone when you're playing games. Oh yeah, this phone has an RGB fan, which sounds cool but is kind of lacking. It helps a little bit with heat, claiming a massive 60 Fahrenheit CPU cooling, which doesn't really seem realistic honestly, and can achieve 20,000 RPMs out of this fan. In comparison, my MacBook maxes out at a combined 11,500 RPMs out of 2 fans. So 20,000 seems like an exaggerated claim, especially when the cooling doesn't seem to help that much in my testing. Well, not like a computer at least. And the colors are cool. If they change colors or moved, that would be kind of cool. Same thing with the REDMAGIC logo on the back, but they have one color to display, and that's it. They go on and off, or they stay static. That's about it. Nothing special. One thing that confuses me is the refresh rate. Don't get hung up on it, and expect 40 to 90 frames per second max in most games. Running PUBG, I get 60 frames per second in pretty much every mode except for the highest, which stays at about 40 frames per second. Balanced is the only time that I can get 90 frames per second. Same with Genshin Impact. I don't really play that much, so I don't really know what's going on, but I did see the frames drop to about 45 at some times, and generally was about 51 to 60 frames per second max. Funny enough, Grand Mountain Adventure was the only game that I tried that actually hit 165 Hz, even though settings show that it's a max of 60 frames per second. But realistically, you're looking at 45 to 60 frames per second unless you drop the quality, which defeats the purpose of having high refresh rate in the first place. But the most important part about this is realistically, you can set your phone to 90 Hz or 120 Hz and you won't really notice. You only get 165 Hz out of the system UI, and even then there's no way for me to really confirm that it's actually pushing 165 frames per second. Lastly, we have the dual stereo speakers, which sound pretty cool. Not as good as something standard like an iPhone 13 Pro, but it's still pretty good and very loud. They are stereo speakers, though, not stereo speaker. There's a headset jack on the top. I never used it, but you can. What I did use was the Bluetooth 5.2 support. There are some accessories that REDMAGIC makes, but I didn't buy any of them to test them, so sorry about that. And for most people wanting this phone, this is where the review ends. But what about everything else? You know, like the non-gaming aspects of the phone. For the day-to-day usage, this phone is honestly amazing. It's a huge phone with a large screen, but it doesn't come without its faults. Because of the screen and 1080p resolution, it isn't as sharp as I would expect, but normal YouTube videos and social media scrolling look perfectly fine on this screen. And those apps generally run at 90 or 60 frames per second. It's when you're watching HDR content that makes you wish that the resolution was a little bit better. Also, the touch response is strange, giving me issues and not really registering gestures properly, but that's mainly because of the REDMAGIC 4.0 OS that sits on Android 11. I'm hoping software updates will fix this issue that I'm having, but so far, no bueno. The phone has an underscreen optical fingerprint scanner, which works pretty well. This does also work with the face unlock option. I ended up using face unlock during the day and the fingerprint scanner at night because even at full brightness, face unlock struggled at night. But with the scanner is a heart rate monitor, which sounds like the dumbest idea you can think of or something that's kind of gimmicky, but in practice, it's fairly accurate. As for the build, the front and the back are actually glass, being Gorilla Glass something. They don't really explain that. The frame is metal, again, something that they don't really explain, but I assume it's aluminum, and this all adds up to a weight of 220 grams, which is actually lighter than the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Impressive, seeing that the battery is 28% larger and has a physical fan in this phone. But transparent gaming back aside, the frame design is actually really nice in my eyes, and I'd love to see a more modest phone with this type of design. Now this is an awesome phone, really. Snappy OS, major battery and charging speeds, durable frame, good amount of high-speed storage and RAM. But this phone is also under $1,000, so downsides are gonna appear. Overall, this phone does get hot, so case usage is recommended to kind of cool it down. And I didn't really notice it to get too hot unless I was playing a game, obviously. While the speakers are loud, it lacks some type of bass, and the sound is kind of bland. Not too tinny, just bland. The size of the phone is kind of annoying, especially when gaming doesn't really require this size or aspect ratio. Lack of memory card support, wireless charging, and water resistance are not horrible things, but dual SIM is kind of weird for gaming phones. I feel like a memory card slot would make a little bit more sense. Wireless charging is neither here nor there, it's just something I'm used to, especially at this price point. But water resistance is scary because most phones have some type of sealing to keep water out even if they don't have an IP rating, but this phone has two large ports on the side that give direct access to the logic board. You don't want to bring this near a pool or the ocean. I mean, can you imagine sand getting in there? Definitely not a good idea. And lastly, the cameras. They're weird. 64 megapixel sensor, but it lacks optical image stabilization and shots look decent. There's an 8 megapixel ultra wide sensor, which doesn't look good either. Then there's a 2 megapixel macro camera that produces worse shots than the main camera, so there's no point in actually using it. The front camera is an 8 megapixel sensor that isn't spectacular either. But okay, it's a gaming phone. Cameras aren't supposed to look good. But we get 8K and 4K 60 frames per second support, but with HDR10. Even the front camera, you can shoot 1080p with HDR10, even though the phone doesn't normally allow for that. It's actually kind of a software glitch that makes the video look better for some reason. Then there's a huge amount of modes that we get, and it's just so weird to me. It's like they went to make an awesome camera setup, and then just gave up. But again, it's a gaming phone. One thing I did notice is that the haptics are decent. Normally for a gaming phone, this should be really good, but it kind of feels like they put like a circular vibration motor in this phone. It's so weak that I literally miss calls when I have my phone on vibrate and it's sitting on a table. As for the phone part, it's decent. My specific phone had a microphone failure that lasted about half a day and then magically just fixed itself. That's always fun. And the 5G support is there, but it's definitely not as reliable as you would expect on normal 5G phones, often giving me no service in areas where other phones will drop to 4G speeds. At least Wi-Fi works well, giving us Wi-Fi 6E support. Lastly, the port on the bottom is USB-C 3.0 and claims to max out at 66 watts of charging. But with everything I tried, 87 watt, 96 watts, 100 watts, I only get a max of 30 watts. You need 20 volts at 3.25 amps to get 66 watts, but I'm supplying 20 volts at up to 5 amps, meaning that 20 to 100 watts and everything in between can come out of this brick. But the phone only accepts 30 watts. It's kind of strange to me. Either way, 30 watts is still super fast and allowed me to never really worry about the battery life ever. Overall, it is strange to see phones in this space. Gaming phones make sense, but at the same time, they don't. It's kind of like seeing a Ferrari hit 0 to 60 miles per hour in 3 seconds, but lack lots of luxury options at over $300,000. But then Tesla will give you all of that, and then some more, in a family car for half the price. The OnePlus 9 Pro seems like a better option and will give you roughly the same performance, but at about $100 more, but you'll definitely get a way better camera. Even dropping down, you can go to the OnePlus 9 and still get an amazing deal at the same or cheaper price, not to mention cameras that, again, will actually work. But realistically, if you made it this far, a gaming phone isn't what you're looking for. But if it is, with the exception of the ROG 5S Pro, this is probably the best gaming phone that you can and should buy right now. But again, only if you want it for gaming. But what do you think of my review of the ZTE Nubia REDMAGIC 6S Pro? The ultimate gaming phone that I will never take full advantage of. Let me know in the comment section in the socials listed above, as well as some other devices you want me to check out. And as always, thanks for watching.